Hi, I am Courtney Lee, and this is my Module 4 video presentation on the skeletal system. So the skeletal system is composed of our bones, cartilage, ligaments, and other connective tissue. And our bones are actually the main organ in the skeletal system. And there are different components that make up the skeletal system. So we have support, we have mineral storage, we have blood cell production, protection, and leverage. So for support, our skeleton makes up the entire framework of our body and supports our body's entire weight. For mineral storage, calcium and phosphate ions are in our body fluids, and actually 98% of our calcium is stored in our bones. And for blood cell production, red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets are made in red marrow, which is stored inside a majority of the bones. And for protection, that just has to do with how our bones protect our delicate organs and tissue. For example, our ribs protect our lungs and our heart, and our skull protects our brain. And for leverage, that just has to do with how the muscles in our skeletal system work together to help move our body. For example, just bending the finger or moving our entire body in a circle has to do with leverage. So there are different shapes to our bones. There are actually 7 different shapes. We have sutural, we have pneumatized, we have short, irregular, long, and sesamoid, and also irregular. So the sutural bones are small, flat, and oddly shaped, and several of our skull bones are sutural. We have pneumatized, which are hollow. An example of this would be our temporal bone. We have short bones, which are box-like in appearance, and the carpals in our wrist are a good example of this. We have irregular bones, which are complex in shape, short, flat, and have notched, rigid surfaces, and a good example of this is our vertebrae, which help protect our spinal cord. And then we have flat bones, which are thin, and they have actually a roughly parallel surface of complex bones, and a good example of this is our occipital bone. And then we have long bones, which are long and slender, and the most common example of this is our femur. And then we have the sesamoid bones, which are small, round, and flat, and an example of a sesamoid bone is our patella or our kneecap. So the bones that make up our skeleton are actually categorized in 2 groups. We have the axial and the appendicular. The appendicular bones are bones of limbs and associated bones that connect the limbs to the trunk at the shoulders and the pelvis. And then our axial bones are bones of the skull, vertebral column, sternum, and ribs. So I'm going to start by showing the cranial bones on the skeleton that came in our lab kit. And also I have written down just the names of the bones that I will be pointing out. Also, I have made marks just with an expo marker. They're just marks to help be able to see on camera exactly what I'm pointing at. So for our cranial bones, we have our frontal bone, which is right here, and it's a flat bone. It makes up our forehead, our upper eye sockets, and then we have our parietal bone. We have it on both sides. We have a left and a right parietal, and the parietal bone is a flat bone, and it's on either side of the head, like I said, left and right. And then we have our occipital bone, which is at the back of the head, and this is flat on the back of the skull, and it has a hole for our spinal cord opening to go up into our skull and be near our brain. And then we have our temporal bone, and this is an irregular bone, and it is right under the parietal bone. And then we have our ethmoid bone, which is kind of hard to point out on the skeleton from our kit, but it is right here, and it makes up part of our nasal cavity. And then we have our sphenoid bone, which is irregular, and it is below the frontal lobe, and it makes up a base of our skull, and kind of right here, also kind of hard to show, but it actually makes up a lot of the inside of the base of our skull. And so those cranial bones are part of the axial skeleton, and the other parts of the axial skeleton, so like I said, the skull, and also all of our cranial bones are either flat or irregular. But along with our skull, it also includes the vertebral column, all of our vertebrae. It includes our sternum right here, and it includes also our ribs. So that is the part, that's all the axial skeleton. And so next, we're going to talk about the appendicular skeleton. And so, like I said, this makes up all of the bones outside that include like our limbs and connected at our shoulders and our hips. So, appendicular, this includes, we have our, and I'm just referring to the sheet of just the names of bones. We have our clavicle right here. Then we have our scapula. Then we have our humerus. Then we have our ulna and our radius. Then we have our carpals in our wrist, then the metacarpals, and then the phalanges, which are the ends of our fingers. And then we have our femur. Then we have our patella, and then our tibia, and we have our tibia, which is right here, and then our fibula, which is the outside bone, and our patella is our kneecap right here. And then we have our tarsals and our metatarsals and our phalanges in our foot, which is similar to our wrist and hands. And those are the bones that make up the axial and appendicular skeleton. The way I can clinically apply my knowledge of the anatomy of our skeletal system in the field of nursing is if I have a patient with a broken bone or if they had orthosurgery. Knowing where the bone is obviously important to know which one's broken or where the surgery took place, but also knowing that bones contain 99% of the body's calcium is important to know, and monitoring whether the calcium levels are too high or too low can help determine how fast the bone is healing or if it isn't healing. And monitoring the calcium is really important, and also knowing how fast the bones are going to heal and how they're going to heal, because bones typically don't heal exactly the way they were before they were broken or had a surgical procedure on them. So it is very important to know everything about the skeletal system and know what part each bone plays in our body.